football, basketball, baseball,
I didn't
track,
realize.
and tennis.
Oh, my God.
I said, when did he go to college?
Yeah, I don't think you
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
You remember Ray Keziah,
Right.
Pam, Ray Keziah? He's 96, and he's in hospice right now.
Oh, is he? Now,
Right,
is Bush
it's
still living around?
96.
He's 96.
Is Bush still around?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
and listen, I saw
I
Irby
did not
Doty
real-
this
I didn't know
morning,
it was
and
still.
Irby's, you know.
You know, we used to live right down the street from Ray.
I know, that's what I was telling Stacy one day, we were out the street. Sure. I couldn't believe
All right,
it.
folks, we are
Go down
Yeah.
the street.
ready to get rolling for our March 5th meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I will try to keep it brief for the few of you who don't have I voted stickers on. Go vote.
I had mine.
Voting is the first day, so
It's a wise choice.
first day, I'm just too long down.
Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from February 6th?
Yes.
And if so, I will take a motion on that.
So move.
Thank you, Al.
Second.
And second, thank you, Leslie. All in favor? Any opposed? Excellent. This is the first meeting in a while that we have no old business to address, so we can jump right into the new business. Just a few quick highlights, conflict of interest disclosures are due. There's a document included in the packet this year. Should be in all of your emails at this point. Just any conflicts that you have, anything coming up financially that might have a vested interest or some form of perceived financial gain tied into any of the organizations that we grant funds to, let us know. Not really a big deal. We can recuse. We've done that before. It's not uncommon, but just erring on the side of transparency and disclosure. It's just easier for me to fill it out. And it's really easy form. So follow-up questions for applicants are due through the portal by March 11th. So that gives you just under a week now to get that done. So if you haven't looked at it yet, take a look, try to finish out your review of each of the applications. You can ask any questions. You won't be prohibited from asking further, but this is the only way that they'll actually have a chance to prepare and be able to meaningfully respond. So let's give our applicants as much time as possible. And then trends and themes in current proposals. Wanted to kind of open up the discussion for any committee members to talk, voice concerns, questions, comments, concerns, anything about sample topics that people might want to address. I am going to turn that over to you, Angela, just to give a little bit of context, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we've heard from a couple of committee members via email with some concerns or questions that they want to bring up. So we wanted to just make sure that you do have that time to bring up anything today that you want to. But we do want to just kind of call your attention to a couple of themes that we have noticed as staff in the applications, which is the impact of the stabilization grants, because they are scheduled to end in June. And so as you're reading through, you're going to see that over and over, you know, that those stabilization grants are running out. So the organizations are asking to fill those gaps. The fund concentration was an area that a committee member did want to talk about. So we'll open that up in just a minute. But then we also do want to put on your radar about multi-year funding. 15 of the applicants this year, 15 of the projects have requested multi-year funding. And if all 15 of those were awarded, it would take up about $2.5 million over the next 3 years of the grant. So it is something that you all need to be thinking about as you're making decisions on multi-year funding. But again, we just kind of wanted to let you all have a time to talk about any questions or concerns that you've noticed as you're going through the applications or anything. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
What does fund concentration mean?
That was a request of one of the committee members. They wanted to kind of maybe talk about basically, you know, it's right at $4 million. And they wanted to talk about if there were any concentrations or I know one of the things that committee member had brought up is, you know, some of the larger funding, you know, if the committee had ever thought about doing like caps on the amounts of requests or anything like that. So that was a committee request to put that on there, so.
I was the one who brought that up because I had a question, just an observation I had was that in a lot of the applications or in some of the applications we were cited as the only source of funding. And so I wanted to understand from a sustainability perspective, how we're thinking about that. it was like a couple of things, like in some instances, we were the only source of funding. And then, in other instances, we were also, the asks were quite large. And this is my first time going through this process, so of course, maybe this is not a surprise to you. But in the instance that, so the asks were large, and so I thought that they were asking for a disproportionate amount of the funds if we were to consider all of the applicants. And in some cases, we were one of the only sources of funding, or maybe one of two. And so I wanted to understand like how the community thinks about it. Are we looking for projects that can stand alone and benefit from our funding to enhance the project? Or is it okay to support projects that in the absence of our funding, they would not exist? So that was kind of what the ongoing thought I was having when I was looking at this.
I don't know that
That's
there's,
good.
I was gonna say, I don't know that there's been consistent philosophy, at least in the last round, and I'm fairly new as well, but I think it's helpful to have that diversity of thought and discussion when we're reviewing, because at least in the last year, what I recall is that they were funded primarily at the 190% levels. I might be mixing up those numbers a tad bit, but primarily that the projects were then, in the last cycle, the projects were ranked by each individual based off of the, using the matrix and the rubric, and that the fund concentration piece wasn't a big part of that matrix, meaning that if they had a large ask within their request, it didn't, it was part of the discussion, but it didn't erode from whether or not the ranking within the matrix.
Okay.
And I will say with the matrix, the budget is definitely an important part of that. And that is something that this committee, that every committee member takes a look at the budget and scores that individually. And, staff can provide some insider input if needed, if questions arise. But that is something where it is kind of potentially more subjective with the budget.
The first year that I did it, it was helpful to know historically what each organization was awarded in the past. And I don't know if Diana, you have access to that, but that might be something that management staff can provide with regard to historically what amounts were awarded in prior years to help, if that helps you, if you're trying to figure out, is this too large of an ask from one organization? Just might be helpful to look at past projects.
And I was able to discern some of that by looking at the progress reports that are posted.
Okay.
But you really can't tell if it's the same project. And then I also was able to glean some information by looking at the questions from last year that the applicants responded to. But again, it's a lot of work to go digging and then not really sure what the application itself said. So I'm probably piecing together information and making assumptions because I don't have access to that historical data. So, that would be helpful to me too if the committee thinks that would be worthwhile.
I did pull up the last 3 years, just to look since that. I was trying to figure out about who was multi-funded and who wasn't funded. But it was helpful just to see what the amounts were,
Right.
how much the asks were going up.
And not explaining the
Not
difference
explaining.
between last year and
And
this year.
this year, exactly. And because in that results question, we ask about if you were awarded a grant for this project last year, please explain results you achieved with the previous grant or however it was awarded. And pretty much folks ignored that. And I've tried that. But I think that's very important, particularly when we're getting up to levels of, 2 and 3 and 4 and $500,000.
I got the sense that some of the applicants might think that we had all been along the whole way and had all that historical information, because it almost felt like it was a cut and paste from a previous grant with, assuming that we had some background information that the newer ones don't have.
Right,
Um,
right. How hard is that to get us implemented?
I mean, we can easily pull you like the awards from the past several years and everything. To compare apples to apples, to tell you if it's the exact same project, you know, it may take a little time, and.
Could we make the assumption that the title is the same, it's the same project? Of course, there was one there that said, we want to continue to do such and such.
Right, some of them.
So some of them maybe
But yeah,
allow
we-
for that.
We can pull you, some data together and maybe, like maybe have a spreadsheet that just has, you know, like previous year amount, and then like just a short description of what the project, what they describe the project as in past years. We can pull that together.
Philip has his hand raised online.
Hi, Philip.
Hey, I'm going off
Can't hear.
maybe going a little bit of a tangent, but my question is, within the broad field of access to early childcare and topics that these applications address, are we open to receiving applications for advocacy, since so many of the issues we're dealing with are eventually only going to be dealt with by policy? In other words, can county dollars be used for advocacy at the state level, even if that advocacy extended into lobbying? So that
I
if
can
we
say
received an
Nick, with our
application,
council space, probably not.
probably not, you said?
No, I'm somewhat joking, but Mike, do you want to weigh in on that, or is that something that we want to do a little homework on?
I need to do a little homework on that, honestly,
Well-
to see exactly what we could do. We could do it through Gordon Smith. Perhaps.
Yeah,
Let me point out something, though. I'm glad this conversation's come up because we need it.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, from being one of the original commissioners, when we started this, you know, the reason we started this fund was we were hearing from a lot of the businesses, a lot of the people, that we didn't have enough slots in Buncombe County for early childhood. And we started it for new slots. But the way it's evolved, it's changing from that because so many are trying to survive. And we didn't know that we would end up, you know, sustaining, you know, that but it was originally started for new slots. And, you know, if we get into the advocacy, I think you're gonna have to bring it back to the commissioners for that. Because it was for new slots, Philip. That's what we really started for. We wanted to see the money used.
But you can't get new slots unless you have staff, and you can't get staff unless people are compensated appropriately. So unless there is a sustainable source of funding, which I believe has to be public funding and not, I mean, it can't be funded by the county alone, there's going to have to be a state funding source. Otherwise, it seems to me that we are going to be in the business of general operating support for a limited number of centers on an ongoing basis, because the underlying problem is compensation. And advocacy seems to me, is a long-term strategy and just one strategy, but without policy change, I don't see how we get out of the business of funding on an ongoing basis general operating support, which I don't mind doing. I think it's they're good grants, but it's a Band-Aid.
But I think for advocacy, though, I know the chamber's getting involved. We're gonna have to get we can't do it from government alone. no way. But we're gonna have to get the chamber, a lot of these businesses, and some from talking to on the EDC committee, I know they are ready to get involved. And I think they realize we got to do more of that and work the legislature to really get anywhere. Because when you look at the salaries, you look at just the amount we get in the vouchers for Buncombe County, all of that. But yeah, we're gonna have to do it. But I don't see us, and this is just me, I'm one commissioner, but I don't see us doing it from these funds.
And I'll add to that and share with the entire board, for those of you who don't spend every Tuesday night watching us, I hope you don't. This has continued to be something on our radar and how we navigate the use of our lobbyists and advocates in Raleigh and the conversations that we're having with our state delegation. He's been very engaged. I think they're very passionate. I think using every tool in our tool belt to recognize that the county has limited funds that we're trying to fix a bunch of problems with, but maybe we elevate that to commission and say one of our legislative priorities is funding for this and continued advocacy, not just in terms of asking for a dollar ask that may or may not come, but keeping this as one of our top 5 legislative priorities going forward, because you're correct, Philip. I don't see a world where this gets better without advocacy. We have to name that for Raleigh. We have to keep staying in their ear about that. What they do is their business, but I do think we're perfectly poised to recognize that as a priority for our county and what we want Raleigh to hear from us.
Yeah, actually, I would only want to say that what they do is our business, not theirs.
Yeah, that's right.
I agree with that. If you can send a letter telling them that, that'd be great.
Well, let's just remember too, that every year for 25 years or whatever, we have had a pointed, organized advocacy effort for early childhood.
Sure.
When Smart Start started 25 years ago, but even before that, because Buncombe County had Children First, which preceded Smart Start, we were advocating for 0 to 5. And Children First has been the banner, carrier for this for all these years. And one of the things that we've talked about, that maybe some folks around the table haven't heard that you mentioned, Al, is that, and I haven't checked of late, but I don't think it's changed, and that is that the amount that counties get in reimbursement for subsidy, vouchers that families, when they enroll their children, how much the center gets paid off that subsidy is not the same from county to county.
No.
And when you look at Buncombe and the contiguous counties, for at least 15 years, we have been the lowest compensated county among the ones around us. There's a reason, a complicated reason, maybe we want to walk through that again with this committee because it's very important. But the good thing that the legislature did this year, by the grace of God, was they moved the subsidy rate up across the state and took a more recent study that was done of the market rate for subsidy and raised the subsidy rates to that 2018 market rate. Before they were using a rate of like 2014 or something. Now 2018 is a long way from 2023, but it's better than what it was. And this is an area of childcare finance that is so complicated that there's so many people involved. And now I'm aware that there's an early childhood education caucus that is bipartisan. There's an article about 2 or 3 months ago about this caucus. And that is one ray of hope that I've seen, that if perhaps we could really work with that caucus. And I'm sure that Smart Start and all these statewide groups, NC Child in particular, are all over this. That's not to say we shouldn't be too. I hope there's a way that we could support this from the county side.
So I have a question regarding funding that ties into all of what we're talking about. Given the number of large requests we're seeing, and a lot of it is going towards salaries and maintaining the salaries. A question I had was, the partnership is asking for a large amount to continue the pilot that had been started, which involved increasing, I think was the subsidies or the reimbursement for salaries. So the question that's going through my mind is if they're asking for money that will then be filtered out to some of the organizations, and the organizations are asking for money to raise the salaries, how do we separate that out so we're not, in essence, sending, two sources of funds to raise salaries to the same organization?
I'm trying to remember,
Do you follow what I mean?
there's no one here from the partnership. They had one, I can't think of the third one that they submitted, but you're saying that they were asking for,
There was a $900,000.
Part of their pilot is to bring the NC pre-K teachers.
oh, NC pre-K,
Right.
okay, so
And
this
that's
is
what I
what,
was gonna say, Mark.
they
That
did
is-
this pilot
that is
with
one of the
us.
things,
Yeah,
that only
pilot,
NC pre-K teachers, so like the organizations could be asking for funding to increase the other staff that aren't NC pre-K. But, and that's what I, so that is one thing that,
But how do we know that they're not asking,
double dipping,
again, not intentionally,
right,
but, not knowing what the
That's a
partnership
good point.
was asking for, they're asking them to be able to keep paying their NC pre-K people at, parity with the public schools.
right.
So they put in a certain amount, which was, because again, there are large amounts there for salaries. So my question is, how do we know that we're
Yeah.
not sending it in two different ways?
Did you submit that, or have you submitted it yet for the question?
Not
Deadline?
specifically to
I think that would be
some of
great,
them.
Mark, to explain that. And then maybe it gets routed to more than just the partnership. And anybody's asking for NC.
Well, I think it might, I think it would be more, I'm not sure it's to more of the, I think it should be directed to the partnership, I think
Well,
also
sure,
has to be
yeah.
directed,
Because they're managing that pilot for us. This was
right,
our project, really.
right.
right, and then that is also something too, like during contract development. So if you do fund one of the organizations that's asking for salary, that is one thing that, as we're going through doing contract development with them and everything, staff can try to double check and make sure that it's not for their NC pre-K classrooms, but other classrooms. If the partnership one is funded as well as their ones too. So yeah, I do.
That's a good thing.
Did you have a question answered?
Not really, and it's just so complicated, but are, are we thinking, when we assess budget, I'd love to hear from individual committee members, if they're thinking about revenue sustainability when they're thinking about budget, and what I mean by that is the fact that the organization is being funded by multiple revenue sources and has a likelihood of being able to be sustained outside of the work of this committee. Is that something that other committee members are using when they think about how they're assessing an organization's budget?
I can say that's something that I would think about. It's hard to quantify exactly whether I view that as a negative or positive, depending on the age of the organization, the type of work they're doing, if they're responding to a specific need that we expressed, and trying to trailblaze for us, versus, as you said, it's becoming so reliant on government funds that may or may not be available to you if our priorities shift year in, year out. I can see it being a negative or positive. I'm not sure how folks feel about what that looks like on paper, but that's absolutely something in a very ethereal sense. I get very worried when I see we are the only, and then there's no other long-term plan of like, well, yes, we're relying on you this year, but the next 3 years, here's what we're gonna apply for, and there's this funding and that funding. But that would cause me to at least ask a few more questions. I don't think that's the wrong way of looking at it at all.
There is that sustainability question. And sometimes they'll right towards that, sometimes not, of course. We had a discussion with Phillips involvement of one of our meetings about whether that question was even worth putting on the application, because a lot of times folks don't know where they might go to get other funds, and is it really useful information?
Well, and I think one of the points that has been made through the years is, you know, the majority of these are nonprofit organizations, and just by default,
Right,
they're dependent on grants, you know.
right. Well, they're parent fees for most of them, but for all of them, it's a varying percentage depending on the center and subsidy, like we said, and there are even times when they're put the proposal in, and I would suspect that they have other revenue like parent fees, but they don't show it. So you really, unless you put it up as a question, the way we've got this organized, which I think is good, because we can give them a chance to clear our heads, whatever. But unless they tell us, we don't know.
Yeah.
And when you are the only funder, I think it's not the model we had when we started this, that we would be operating childcare centers in a way.
Well, and just for clarification, the budget form that they're filling out, where they're listing their revenue and their expenses, the itemizing, is just pertaining to the project that they're asking for funding for.
Right.
And if you look at the bottom, it's their overall budget. So they may have $1 million in other funding, but it's not earmarked for this specific project that they're requesting funds for this.
I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah, I just think it is important that when we fund, that we fund organizations and projects that are sustainable year after year. And we probably also expect that there'll be new organizations and projects every year as well, so. Thank you.
I think it's fascinating to have that conversation in the context of knowing that we just had many places closed across the state. We were impacted very recently by that ourselves, so there is a risk that we need to be conscious of. How we avoid that without becoming punitive is kind of the art, but that's a valid point. I don't want to find ourselves a year and a half later in an organization saying, well, if you don't fund me, then I'm just gonna shut down and get 35 slots open again.
Right.
Not something I think anyone would do maliciously, but it's a reality when you're running these businesses that are underfunded for numerous reasons that we have to be ready for that. And we were lucky this year. I don't want to find ourselves in that spot again. I guess that kind of dovetails nicely into just picking y'all's brains about multi-year funding, because I know that's a big part of the business model for a lot of the folks we work with, but great, I think it has a lot of benefits. We've done that on other county committees before. The question I would have is, how malleable do you think our priorities and objectives are? I think year by year, we kind of shift. For example, workforce is our priority right now. If we see that being consistent for the next 2 years, then multi-year funding is not a big deal for me. If there was some need to pivot, what does multi-year funding look like if that money's tied up across multiple years? And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I'm just curious what y'all's read is on that.
Going back to what Alva's original purpose was, I could see multi-year funding being especially useful if there's a new center wanting to start up, and needed multi-year funding in order to get off the ground, so that we can create more slots. Because again, that's, we've got multiple pieces, without the workforce, we can't create the slots. We get the workforce, that automatically doesn't mean more slots. And so how do we then, prioritize our funding, in a way that creates both the workforce and, new centers, new slots, and I think multi-year funding for the newer centers might, help that. Again, I'm not sure off the top of my head how many sort of new centers we have. People out there looking to create a new center.
Well, I can think of some that we funded, not multi-year officially, but we funded year over year. And they're still asking for funds in this, well, past 3 years. So it's hard to turn the spigot off.
Once we build it, we have it.
Well, makes you wonder. I think also I was surprised by the number of for-profit businesses that applied this year. I don't think we'd seen that. I didn't go back and count, but it's at least 3 I can think of. What does that say to us? Our guidelines say they can't apply.
We can.
I went back and double checked that, and I thought that was right. They can't apply. But to your point, Mark, I'm not sure how we resolve these tensions as we have done something really important here in Whatcom County. I hate to think where these centers would be, but for what the commissioners did back in, was it 19 or whatever it was, well, before that, I guess. Thank God they did, because I can't imagine what we've done.
So regarding the multi-year funding, I think it's an important aspect to consider, because I think that assurance of that second or third year funding, if it was part of the ask, allows the organization to be more strategic and be looking long range instead of long range problem. And I think with the 1 year sort of guarantee that you have funding, well, even with the grant, that it results in them sometimes looking short term or in the near future without planning ahead and being able to make some decisions that would really move the needle on the issue without that multi-year funding guarantee. And I think we had that conversation as a committee as to the curiosity of which organizations are interested in multi-year funding, and then that would allow us to better assess how much of the funding would we have available year after year based on the initial ask. I think that's important for us to understand. So that's at least my position on the multi-year plan. I think it's an important opportunity that we need to allow people to express if that's the need.
And I will say, in years past, going through this, you know, there's not been a consensus on if the committee does or doesn't want to do it. And like, even last year, you know, we came to that very last meeting in April, and it was just like a very last second of, okay, we've just decided we're not doing any multi-year funding this year. And so I would encourage the committee to start thinking about it now, rather than wait till that very last meeting in April, just so that, I mean, you do have the time to have multiple conversations.
As I recall, now you probably remember this too, but we had an
So
ad hoc committee that kicked this around a
Yeah,
little bit.
we did.
And sort of didn't come up with any parameters,
No.
but had some ideas. Do we set a certain percentage that multi-year can exceed, and I'm just throwing out 25% of the total, or something, so we had room to give new grants. But we kicked that can down the road on the decision. So here we are again.
And I do think, to what Martin was speaking to about priorities shifting potentially with multi-year funding, as we've seen in the last couple of years in this committee and the work. That's something where, you know, a multi-year contract, the spirit of the award, the nature of the project would have to remain intact for the duration of that contract. We can do little tweaks with budget line item transfers, but, you know, if there was a huge new need that was requested, we couldn't incorporate that into that multi-year contract. So that's I think that's another thing for the committee to consider as you're thinking about the multi-year process and the potential applications that have requested that.
Did we say that once you're giving that first year of multi-year funding, that amount stays constant through the 3 years?
So they do identify the amount at the beginning, but it's not necessarily the same over 3 years. Because like right now, this year, we're in the final year on collaborative with OPA. And in year one, they gave the amount and there's actually decreased over the 3 years. So we just put it in the contract that way, as what they had proposed as, year one was this amount, year two. And then they are locked into that because we did have one of the ones that was awarded multi-year funding halfway through, came through and was like, can we request an increase? And they're like, it's what was recommended for that multi-year. So that is one thing that the organizations have to think of is, what will their needs change over that 3 years? And by the time they get to year three, are they going to need more funding?
And I vaguely recall that Rachel mentioned that we were talking about multi-year, but that there was an opportunity for staff to go back and look at models that the county has used in the past with requests for multi-year funding on other committees perhaps, or other.
As far as I know, this is the only committee that does do multi-year funding.
That does.
So we kicked it around in JCPC. I don't know if that ever actually ended up going into it, but we studied that really heavily. So if you give me a moment, another meeting, I can offer what the high level notes were from that. And I guess that's kind of what colored my perspective on this is the criminal justice space is changing every year, to say the least. How we respond to that, what treatment looks like, what the needs are in our community, and how we best respond in effective and compassionate ways. I view this as kind of the same. And I hate taking away the certainty because I haven't worked with nonprofits 2 years, 3 years minimum, right? I prefer 5 when I'm representing those nonprofits, but it is difficult because, again, if we had a place shut down, I don't know what the answer would be. I really don't know what our mechanisms are. I'd have to defer to Commissioner Whiteside. I don't think it would be a small lift to pull from commission budget. Alvaro might kill me for trying to unexpectedly take from that budget, but we do have those kind of needs in this
Don't
space.
let her eat.
I'm realizing this meeting is recorded, so. But as long as we're all aware of that, maybe, and to your point, I think Mark might have mentioned it, maybe that's a cap of no more than 25% of our funds can be used for X amount, or whatever that magic number may be, but anything we can do to give people enough stability to stay in business and do the work that they want to do and are passionate about while giving ourselves a mechanism to prevent disaster and catastrophe in this very sensitive space.
I have another question. We understand we're talking about multi-year funding. But how many organizations have gotten a grant from us every year since we've been in existence, and it's not multi-year funding? That's another issue.
That's true. Could y'all work us that out?
Yeah, could you tell? Yeah, I'd like to know.
For those who have been on longer than myself, is that kind of a thing that these successful organizations de facto get
Yes.
multi-year fund? Okay.
Well, it's de facto in that we still go through the process and
Yeah.
the people, I think the way it happens to where, like Carol was saying, we draw a line at some point because you look at all the scores and whichever one's having the most points, you just go from descending order, and when you get to $4 million, whatever it is, and so we know, probably some of us know more about some of these projects than we do about others, or you're confident in the track record or whatever it is. And so I think there is a definite advantage to those who have been funded before.
I think it adds though a level of, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like, if I were in administration or operations for a nonprofit and every year I had to reapply and there's that like period of time where like I have to scramble for contingency planning every year.
Right.
And you're losing efficiencies from an operations standpoint because you're having to do that and then, scare your staff that maybe you're not gonna have funding. And then, oh, by the way, well, we were gonna give it to you, next funding cycle anyway, that sometimes that.
It's very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there's some value in thinking about what are the organizations that could truly, we have demonstrated multi-year funding with them perhaps, and that there is no other source of sustainable funding that could help support them, and then use that as a criteria to determine whether or not there's a percentage we can set aside for multi-year funding. Because I can imagine it's really difficult for some of the partners we've worked with year after year to have to go through that mental exercise.
It's very difficult.
I will say the other grant program that utilizes multi-year funding is the Isaac Coleman Grant. And that's set up differently in that all organizations that are funded, it's a 3-year cohort model. So that is only on a 3-year cycle where grants are being made, awards are given out. But they are, all organizations receive 3 years unless there's some delinquency with the contract.
And those are the same, like,
Same amount
the same amount
for the 3 years.
That's a $500
That's much smaller too.
Yeah, that's a $500
Yeah, because
dollar.
500 is the cap for the whole pot.
year.
Yeah, right.
So I don't want to talk us into another subcommittee, but it seems like it might be wise to have some folks look at this and come back and have recommendations about, unless folks want to continue this conversation, which I'm not opposed to, but I think there's some questions that were raised that we really might want to dig in on before we offer conclusive recommendations. For me, one question I'd love to add to the list is what would be our mechanism for making sure that organizations remain kind of like mission focused and compliant with whatever metrics they state to us. I love the stability of multi-year grants. If someone's failing to meet those obligations or things happen, what levers do we have to pull to either help them get back on track or bring those funds back to an organization that might be.
Right, and I will say that, in all of our contracts, even when we do the multi-year funding unit, it's written as a 1-year contract that auto renews for the 2 years. But there is language in all of our contracts that it is based on performance and budget, because, there's a possibility that at any time the budget could change overall and all. So we do put mechanisms in that, so that if they're not meeting, the performance metrics or the budget isn't passed, that we can back off of those contracts.
Is there a template we could see?
Yeah, I can share with you any of the contracts at all.
I mean, I assume you start with a basic template, that might be helpful, so we can see what's in there. Some of it may address concerns that come up, or it may stimulate other questions.
Staff also performs contract monitoring for certain organizations. And that could certainly be part of the conversation for multi-year funded organizations.
Right.
Any further thoughts or direction on how y'all like this to appear before the committee again? I'm flexible with either. If it needs to be on a future agenda, I'm fine to do that. If you want a subcommittee to create recommendations to bring back to us, I can do that too.
Just a question is, are there staff that have experience in designing multi-year funding? I'm just curious if there's internal individuals that could maybe start the work around, if we were to consider something structurally, what would the county feel comfortable with as far as the considerations of multi-year funding?
I won't speak for people who may or may not be sitting in this room, away from me. Yes, we do have staff that I think would be able to navigate us through that process.
I just didn't know if we were starting from like a blank sheet of paper, or if there were some recommendations that staff had or experience with multi-year funding in the past.
I'd just like to,
Go ahead, Phil.
I was just gonna add, and I'm not gonna be on a subcommittee, but one of the questions I think when we're thinking about these things is what organizations are gonna give us the biggest bang for the buck in terms of whatever our priority happens to be. If it's slots, then slots. If it's the pipeline for teachers, then that's what it is. I think that sometimes there's pressure to fund broadly because we're representing the county here, and therefore we feel a need not to fund the same people over and over again, not to fund the same organizations, and somehow we hold it against them because they ask us again and again. But are those the ones having the biggest effect? So I don't want to get swayed by the idea that our mission is to spread the money around as broadly as possible to as many different organizations as possible. It seems to me that our role is to help as many children as possible. And so who is actually serving that breadth and diversity of students is more important to me than how many separate nonprofits. I mean, we could fund 20 really, really small nonprofits that are doing a great job, but they're really not hitting the right number. You know, they're just not getting the mass of the breadth of the touch. So anyway, I'm sure I'm rambling, I always do, but that's my thought.
Thank you, Philip.
Well, Martin, were you thinking that this subcommittee would work and make recommendations before we meet on April 2nd?
That might be a little bit of a tight time frame,
Yeah.
but really just to kick around any ideas or additional questions that come from focusing expressly on this issue. I'm not, if it turns out that there's no recommended change and they decide like what we're doing now is the best, most practical means of going about it, then so be it. We don't have to readdress it again, but maybe May as a tentative timeline, and it doesn't have to be in a formal meeting. We can have an email sent out, we can put it online, but just so people know where our heads are at, we can signal to our community partners what we're thinking about, and they can prepare, advocate appropriately for the folks who are not in the room right now.
So it wouldn't have an effect on this process now?
Not formally, no.
I mean, this will be done.
Unless someone wants to stick around till 11, we can knock that out.
So is there, from your past experience, is there a reason why you couldn't defer any multi-funded decisions for this year until after this timeline is complete, since you're just binding one budget year at a time, correct? So is there a reason that you couldn't defer multi-year funding unless there's one that's just one-time funding that takes 3 years and has very clear metrics, you know? And then give the committee time to, and the new members, time to go through the first round of funding, get the answers to the questions, and then have a committee form that can wrestle. And I know you wrestled through last summer and came back without any answers, and so maybe I'm replicating what you did last year. But then, I don't know, it just seems to me it might make more sense to defer making multi-year funding unless something clearly, I mean, and some folks really, I think some applications very clearly spelled out what they would do with the funding multi-year that was different. You know, it was a 3-year plan as opposed to sustaining the same thing, doing the same thing for 3 years without having different metrics.
That's correct. I feel no real time pressure for this year. I'm not worried about that as much as just as we're thinking through this process, as we're in it, digging through these applications, these questions are coming up, just having a framework for our experienced members and our newer members to kind of converge around what we're thinking about. So this time next year, we'll have a clear course of action.
I guess that's an interesting question. I think we need to put to all of the multi-year applications, and that was if a decision on multi-year was deferred, would that cause them to withdraw their application this year? In essence, does it have to be a multi-year interval in order for them to move forward?
Well,
I would say in the last couple of years, this has basically been the nature of the process, where it's kind of been deferred after the fact. And this past year, we didn't make any multi-year, yeah, and we did not get any pushback from folks who requested multi-year, who were awarded for one.
In the current year, right now, we have 2 projects that were awarded multi-year funding, and they're in their final year. So starting with the new grant cycle that you all are scoring right now, there's not any previously committed multi-year funding back in the year.
And are any of those who have expiring 3-year funding
We have one.
applicants?
Yes,
Yes.
one. I like the idea, Martin, of getting our heads back around this. It seems like we've had good work with the subgroup, tackling it, bringing the information back. And if it's, maybe May or so, then I think we're gonna be very busy in the next month. But I don't know how much time people will have in the next month, but if we had a little more time than that, I think that would be a good way to go.
Is anyone interested, let's not say that, let's take away the month time constraint. Is anyone interested in having this discussion further, smaller setting, and willing to give 30 minutes of your time? Awesome. 1, 2, 3, and I'll throw myself in there too. And I won't speak for Commissioner Whitesides, but feel free to add his name.
Now you better run here, brother.
No, I gotta go,
Oh,
sorry.
okay.
Yeah. Into what?
Martin got you.
I saw a window, Al. Excellent. Well, thank you all for your valuable insight and questions on that. Some of those questions, let's
Good conversation.
definitely work into our March 11th deadline for some of our organizations and go from there. All right, just so you all have a quick look. Thanks, sir. Just so you all have an idea of what we're looking at, coming deadlines, March 11th, 8 a.m., so technically March 10th, unless someone really likes waking up early. March 18th is our next deadline for applicants to respond to the follow-up questions. So for the folks watching online or any organizations that are interested, please have those answers in, because a lot of the questions that we've gotten in the past have been kind of dispositive in how committee members make their choices about what level they're going to fund you. So there's a tangible benefit to answering those questions. Our scoring deadline is going to be on April 1st. 2 committee meetings that we have scheduled just to address that on the 2nd and 16th. 23rd is our optional meeting, but probably won't need that unless.
We didn't use it last year.
Okay. And April 26th, recommendations are due to the county budget's office. That is probably our hardest deadline, because it is very difficult to put together a budget for the county of this size. So we want to make sure we have ours in and no hiccups down the road. Any questions, concerns, comments? Perfect. So there's a document that was included in y'all's meeting packet for some upcoming trainings for ECE providers, for students with disabilities or behavioral challenges. The committee members had requested that in the previous meeting, that all y'all wanted that, see that in the packet.
Mhm.
Excellent. Any questions, concerns about that, or any other announcements that you need to be aware of? All right, well, we'll move to public comment. And I have Corey Price, sorry,
That's okay. You know,
terrible reading cursive.
That's okay. Hi, my name is Corey Price. I'm from Evolve Early Learning, and I am here today to speak up just a little bit about what we're doing over Evolve. I first want to say thank you for everyone who advocated for us last year. We were able to get the $75,000. That was kind of a Hail Mary from this organization from your group doing a lot of work over the summer to make sure we had those funds. It has been life-changing for our center. We're one of those centers who takes the kids where everybody else gets kicked out. And so we have some of the kids who have the hardest challenges at home, but also hardest challenges in the classroom. And we really think we're onto something. We think we're creating a model for teachers and parents to learn, to be able to access these children and help them get them back into their bodies, back into learning, and really to have that social and emotional connection that we know is so imperative before they go to kindergarten. I want to speak to a couple of things that are true about Evolve. We are not a nonprofit. I wish that we knew how to run a nonprofit to the way that it needs to be run. We are teachers turned into a preschool. And so we've learned so much in the last few years. We are capable of running this as a social justice mission-based business, but we are also open to the idea of having a nonprofit and being that we just need some support to get over that line in order to be able to do it. Another thing that I want to mention just really quickly is that over the time that this grant has been allowed, there's been 1 year that we weren't granted at all, but every other year we've been granted a very low amount of what we've asked for, sometimes less than 50% and other times 30%. So overall, we're looking at over about $400,000 that we didn't get into our business, and it's catching up to us now because we still did everything we said we were going to do. We said we were going to open it in toddler classrooms, we opened it in toddler classrooms. We've done it, but if we don't have people get behind us now, our business is going to have to take a right turn, and it would really be really disappointing to let the beauty that's happening at Evolve not grow. It's something very special that our community needs. I know because I was a teacher in those classrooms. I have been in the buildings of all of our elementary schools and a lot of these preschools, and I can tell you they're not doing what we're doing. And we are a place where teachers can come back into the field, who've left the field and left early childcare altogether, have come back to be in our school because this is what they were looking for. This is what they're wanting. And we want to share that, but we are, I would think of us like a startup. We're very much still a startup because we opened in 2019 and then COVID hit, and it hit us hard. But we're diverse, we're inclusive, and we are the edge of neuroscience, the edge of motivational sciences, the edge of all these things that we're talking about while we're changing our judicial systems, where we have to change early childcare first. And Evolve is doing it. I encourage you to call me, come see the school. My grant is never going to compare to the nonprofits who've been doing it for 40 years. It's just not. I can't write in the way that they can write, but I can do the work. And I can promise you that we're not over there pocketing money. There's no money coming in these pockets, you know. I'm doing it for the kids because I believe in this, and you will see if you stick behind Evolve that we're going to be something that other communities are going to want to do what we're doing. And I believe that we're doing it in partnership with these other centers. So thank you for Saving Valley. Thank you so much for doing those things that you're doing for all the centers, because there's enough to go around. There's plenty of kids who need support. We're not in competition, but I do want to say for Evolve, we are doing something that is really needed in our community, and we hear it every day from parents. I have my longest wait list is from kids with special needs. My longest wait list, I don't even advertise infants, but my longest wait list is kids with special needs, and those parents are desperate. We need to open more classrooms, and I have funders who want to pay for the build out, but I can't do it alone. I need other people to get behind us. So sorry if my language and my typing isn't to the level, but please consider the heart behind this, and please consider us a startup that is mission-based. We are not looking at a handout. We are looking to do the work with you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chloe. Any other public comment? All right, if not, our next meeting is April 2nd, from 12:30 to 2:30. That is our extended time, 200 College Street, ground floor conference room. Motion to adjourn? That seems like a sufficient second. All in favor? Y'all have a great Tuesday. Go vote.